my partner in crime over there, Jeff, he helps us do humanities at Overlook. But so Poetry Day, we're going to start with, and maybe you've seen it, a video called Healing Words, Poetry and Medicine. It's by John Fox,
I've heard of
who
it.
practices, he's a poet, but he practices poetry at Chan's Medical Center in Florida, and it's an hour-long video. We're going to show it from 9:30 to 11 with a discussion. Really, I hate using that word powerful, but I will. The practice of how a poet can work at the bedside, just talking to somebody and taking that patient's words and turning it into a poem. Not by changing anything. As I told you, I think a lot, and maybe you'll comment on this later, is how you use the paper, how you use the space, what the words look like, and how you read it and punctuate it. And I don't want to minimize the work of a poet, but it's, you know, when your child does a piece of artwork, maybe not, you know, when they're 3 or something like that, but even a little later, and you put it in a frame, and all of a sudden it looks like a beautiful piece of work, you know. So even people who don't think of themselves as poets can write and write poetry and have it look like poetry. I just did a poem with the stroke support group, and I wrote it like a poem, and it looks like it could be in an anthology. You know, it's impressive when you think, when your dad gave you that book and said you could write. It's empowering,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
and we can, some better than others.
And I just want to mention that the shaping of a poem is very important to the writer. It really is. And I find that, here's an example. If you want a poem to be very meditative and you want to slow it down, you might decide to use couplets.
Mhm.
That slows the poem down. Then you can read it more slowly, and it gives you more time to take it in, the meaning of it. If you want it to be lively and fun, you don't need to do that kind of thing. You might use more punctuation. You might liven it up with italics. You try to make the thing more visually interesting.
I think of E.E. Cummings when you say
Oh,
that.
yes.
Thinking of Shel Silverstein.
When we started to talk and people reacted to poetry per se and their sort of high school experience, negative experience of analyzing line and form, and then they said, but no, this, you know, it just flowed and I just read it from page to page and it told the story. I said, but we'll ask Sandra. I mean, there is very intentional structure to each of these poems that didn't just happen accidentally. Jeff, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to ask, did you write it linearly?
Not
I
really.
ha- So how
I
did?
had to reshape it.
Yeah.
I did, in the beginning, start to write about the past a little bit. So I wanted to move it sequentially. The early experience of my grandparents, the pogroms they experienced, that kind of thing. I started with their trip from Europe to this country, that kind of thing in the beginning, to give you some background, give myself a background. But then after a while, I wanted to be a little more fluid. I didn't want it to be too rigidly sequential by time. I wanted it to flow in different moods to come in.
So when you started the process, did you have an outline of where you were starting and where it would go?
Roughly, but it kept changing.
That's good. Have a plan that you don't always have to follow, right?
Right.
But, yeah,
Sounds like medicine.
that's interesting. But that's not a joke in a way. I mean, that's true. It's have a plan, but you have to be open enough. I think that's really an important message. And you know, I sometimes I think I speak, you know, maybe outside of my realm. But having a plan, but being open enough to think outside of that plan. I mean, that's maybe a little Jerome Groupman, you know, how doctors think, not getting boxed into your own plan, being able to see it from other angles.